Ethan Cole had lived on the open land since the day he was born. The ranch was not huge or famous, but it was the only home he ever knew. His father had built it with his own hands, plank by plank, post by post, believing that honest work could turn dry soil into a good life. Ethan grew up with that same belief deep in his heart. He always said that as long as he had the land, he had a purpose. But that year tested every belief he held. The sky had forgotten how to rain. For months, the sun burned the ground until it cracked. The wind carried dust instead of cool air, and every morning felt hotter than the last. Ethan's small herd began to grow thin. The cattle walked slower, their breaths heavy. The old wooden water trough stood nearly empty, and the well produced barely enough for daily needs. Ethan tried rationing, but it felt like trying to catch running sand. The more he tried to save, the more the land took from him. Still, he refused to give up. Every day before sunrise, he saddled his horse, Whiskey, and rode out across the dry fields. He checked fences, searched for any sign of green, and hoped to find even a small puddle left from a long-gone storm. He knew he was trying to fight nature itself, but he could not sit still and watch his home fade away. His father's voice lived in his memory. A man only truly loses when he stops trying. And Ethan wasn't ready to lose. The nearest town, Willow Creek, was a half-day ride away, and every time Ethan went there for supplies, he heard the same thing: ranchers leaving. Families were packing wagons, selling their animals, giving up their land because the drought had taken too much. Some tried to encourage Ethan to do the same. They told him no amount of hard work could make water appear. Others simply looked at him with sad eyes, as if they already knew the ending of his story. But Ethan believed the land had more to give. Maybe it was faith, maybe stubbornness, maybe fear of change. Or maybe it was the memories tied to every corner of the ranch. The wooden porch where he learned to walk, the barn where he learned to work, the open fields where he learned to ride a horse without fear. He wasn't ready to walk away from all that. One evening, after another long, dry day, Ethan went out to check the borders of his ranch. The sky was turning orange, and the sun laid a warm light across the land. He hoped the cooler air would help him think more clearly, but instead he felt the weight of worry pull at him again. He walked along the fence line, dragging his hand over the dry posts, when something unusual caught his eye. Tracks, not cattle tracks, and not the heavy steps of a horse either. These were lighter, narrower, and moved in a quick, sure pattern. Someone had been there, someone who walked carefully, almost silently. The tracks began at the edge of the ranch and disappeared toward a small cluster of trees that somehow still stood green. Ethan knelt down and touched the marks. They were fresh, made within hours. He stood up slowly, scanning the land around him. He lived far from the town, and hardly anyone passed through without a reason. Trespassers were rare, but the drought made people desperate. Maybe someone was looking for water or shelter, or maybe they hoped to see if Ethan had supplies they could take. The thought made Ethan uneasy. He wasn't afraid of people, but he didn't want trouble. The ranch was all he had left, and he needed to protect it. He followed the tracks for a short distance, but they faded into the hard ground. The sun had already dropped behind the hills, and shadows stretched long across the fields. Searching in the dark didn't seem wise, so he turned back, but the tracks stayed in his mind like a whisper. That night, he barely slept. Every sound outside made him sit up and listen. He wondered if the person would return, and if they did, what they might want. He tried to tell himself it could have been a traveler passing through, but something about the tracks felt different. Too light, too careful, too purposeful. The next morning began as usual, but the worry still followed him like a shadow. He fed the cattle, checked the water, and tried to plan how long he could keep going before things became impossible. After hours of work beneath the sun, he finally stopped to rest. He sat under the old cottonwood tree, wiping sweat from his forehead, when he heard something strange, soft footsteps, almost too quiet to notice. He turned quickly. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, from behind a patch of brush, a figure stepped forward, small, quiet, confident. It was a young girl, maybe 17 or 18, dressed in simple clothes suited for travel. Her dark hair was tied back, and her eyes were sharp, observant, and alert. She didn't seem frightened, but she also didn't walk like someone who wanted trouble. Ethan stood up slowly, unsure what to expect. He had lived alone for so long that seeing someone new felt strange. The girl stopped a few steps away, watching him with calm eyes, as if she had already studied him carefully. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He wasn't angry, just surprised. The girl raised her hand slightly, a peaceful gesture. "My name is Naira," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't mean to trouble your land." Naira. The name felt unique, gentle yet strong. Ethan looked at her again, this time noticing the subtle details, her posture, the way she carried herself, the confidence in her gaze. She wasn't lost or afraid. She knew exactly what she was doing. He asked why she had come, and she explained she was following the trail of a Mustang she had been tracking for days. The wild horse had wandered across Ethan's land, and she had followed its tracks without knowing anyone lived there. Ethan realized the tracks he saw last evening were hers. As she spoke, Ethan saw no dishonesty in her face. She seemed sincere, calm, and respectful. Still, he couldn't shake his curiosity. He asked how she tracked the horse so easily. She smiled slightly and said she had grown up learning the patterns of the land, the signs the wind leaves behind, and the stories the ground carries. She didn't sound boastful, just truthful. The drought made Ethan suspicious of strangers, but Naira's simple honesty felt different. She looked around the ranch quietly, her eyes studying the dry soil, the tired cattle, the empty water trough. After a moment, she looked back at Ethan and said something he did not expect. "There might be water here, not far under the ground." Ethan blinked in surprise. Many experts had told him water was unlikely. Yet this young girl, whom he had met minutes ago, spoke with certainty. He asked how she knew, and she pointed to the land, explaining small signs he had never noticed. Certain plants still alive, the shape of the ground, the direction of the wind, the pattern of stones. It all seemed mysterious to him, but to her it was as clear as written words. Before she left, she said she would return the next day to show him what she meant. Ethan didn't know whether to believe her, but something in her voice made him hope again. Just a little. That evening, as Ethan watched the sun set behind the hills, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. A spark of possibility. Maybe the land wasn't done helping him. Maybe fate had sent someone at the right moment. Or maybe this girl, Naira, knew something he could never learn alone. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he looked forward to it. The next morning started quietly, but Ethan felt different inside. The thought of Naira returning stayed with him from the moment he opened his eyes. He didn't know why he trusted her so easily. Maybe it was the calm way she spoke, or the certainty in her eyes, or the fact that she understood the land better than anyone he had ever met. Whatever the reason, he found himself waiting for her without admitting it to himself. He finished feeding the cattle, cleaned the trough, and checked the fences again. The sun was rising slowly, spreading soft light across the dry fields. He kept glancing toward the path where she had disappeared the evening before. Hours passed, and he started wondering if she had changed her mind. Maybe he had imagined the hope she had given him. Maybe he had expected too much from a stranger. But just when he was about to return to his chores, he noticed movement near the old oak tree at the edge of the ranch. A small figure stepped out from behind it. Steady, quiet, but sure. Naira had come back, just like she promised. She walked toward him with the same calm confidence she had shown before. Ethan felt himself relax, though he wasn't sure why. He greeted her politely, and she nodded in return. "You said you would show me something," Ethan said. "I will," she replied. "But first I want to see more of your land." Ethan led her across the ranch. Naira walked lightly, her steps nearly soundless. Her eyes moved constantly, noticing everything, the shape of the hills, the scattered rocks, the dry patches, even the faint movement of grass in the wind. She knelt down several times to touch the soil, holding it in her hand as if listening to it. Ethan had lived on this land his entire life, yet watching her made him feel like he had never truly looked at it. She understood things he had never even thought to observe. They reached a small hill overlooking the ranch. Naira stood still for a moment, closing her eyes, letting the wind brush past her face. Then she opened them and pointed toward the western side of the ranch. "There is something there," she said softly. "A sign of water." Ethan followed her, confused but hopeful. They walked across cracked earth, dry brush, and faded grass. The sun climbed higher, and heat wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Still, Naira did not slow down. Her steps were purposeful, guided by something Ethan couldn't see. When they reached the western side, she stopped beside a patch of ground that looked no different from the rest. To Ethan, it seemed ordinary: dry soil, a few scattered stones. Nothing unusual. But Naira crouched down again, sweeping her hand over the surface. She pressed her palm to the ground, listening silently. "How can you tell anything from that?" Ethan asked curiously. She smiled a little. "The land speaks, if you know how to listen." Ethan didn't fully understand, but he respected her knowledge. She pointed toward a small green plant growing between two rocks. It was only a few inches tall, but its leaves were fresher than anything else around. "This plant only grows where the ground still holds some moisture. Not much, but enough," she explained. "It means water might be close." Ethan felt a small spark of hope again. He watched as she stood up and walked a few paces in different directions, checking more patches of land. Her movements were smooth and thoughtful, like she was following invisible lines drawn on the earth. After a few minutes, she stopped and faced him. "You have water here. Not on the surface, but not too deep either. If we dig, we might find it." Her words made Ethan's heart beat faster. No one had given him such hope in months, but he also knew the risk. Digging took time and energy, and if they were wrong, it would all go to waste. Seeing the doubt on his face, Naira said gently, "I understand your worry, but I have tracked water before many times. I trust this sign." Something in her voice, soft but sure, made Ethan trust her too. He grabbed a shovel from the barn and handed her one as well, but she shook her head with a small smile. "You dig. I will guide." So Ethan began to dig. The ground was hard and stubborn, refusing to move. Sweat rolled down his forehead, and dust rose with every push of the shovel. Naira stood close by, watching the soil he lifted, studying its color and texture. "Keep going," she said every so often. "You are close." Ethan continued. His muscles ached, and his arms felt heavy, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, not when there was a chance to save his ranch. Naira waited patiently, offering calm encouragement whenever he slowed down. After a long time, Ethan heard something different. The shovel hit softer earth. The color changed slightly, darker than before. Naira noticed immediately. "That is a good sign. Keep digging." Her voice carried excitement, though still gentle. Ethan dug faster despite his exhaustion. Then suddenly the shovel struck a patch that felt cool. The soil was softer, damp to the touch. He dropped to his knees and scooped it with his hands. It felt moist. Ethan looked up at Naira with disbelief. She nodded, her eyes bright. "There is water here. We just need to reach it." Her certainty gave him new strength. He dug faster, pushing deeper. Minutes felt like hours, and his breath came in heavy bursts. But he didn't stop. Finally, after what felt like an endless effort, a tiny shimmer appeared at the bottom of the pit. A drop, then another. Then a slow, gentle trickle of water began to rise. Ethan stared in amazement. His throat felt tight, but not from the heat. It was from relief, from gratitude, from the sudden realization that he wasn't going to lose everything. Naira smiled, watching his reaction. "The land still remembers its strength," she said softly. Ethan's voice trembled slightly as he whispered, "You were right." They widened the pit together until the water filled it slowly but steadily. It wasn't a rushing river, but it was more water than the ranch had seen in months. Enough to give the cattle hope. Enough to keep Ethan's dream alive. As they rested beside the new water source, Ethan thanked her sincerely. Naira simply shook her head. "I only showed you what the land was already offering," she replied. Ethan didn't agree. He knew he never would have found this on his own. He looked at her with growing respect, realizing how rare her knowledge was. She seemed young, yet her understanding of nature felt ancient. Before she left that day, she promised to return to help him find more signs of hidden water if possible. Ethan nodded, grateful beyond words. When she walked away, her steps light against the earth, Ethan watched her until she disappeared toward the hills. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope mixed with admiration. This girl, a stranger only a day ago, had given him a chance to keep his home alive. That night, Ethan sat on the porch, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. It felt promising. He looked at the stars above and whispered to himself, "Maybe this land has more to give after all." But deep inside, he knew the truth. Hope had returned because Naira had walked into his life at the exact moment he needed her most. And somehow, he sensed this was only the beginning of a story neither of them could yet imagine. The next morning, Ethan woke up before the sun rose. For the first time in many months, he felt excited to start the day. He quickly put on his boots, stepped outside, and walked straight toward the place where he and Naira had dug the small pit. Even from a distance, he could see a faint shine at the bottom. When he got closer, his heart lifted. The water had risen a little more during the night. There wasn't a lot, but it was steady. It was real. He knelt beside it, dipped his hand in, and felt the coolness spread through his fingers. It felt like touching hope itself. He whispered a quiet thank you to the land and stood up just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. He fed the cattle next, pouring some of the fresh water into a bucket. The animals lifted their heads, sniffing the air, sensing something new. Ethan carried the bucket toward them, and as soon as he set it down, they gathered around it, drinking eagerly. Seeing them regain strength brought a warmth to his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. As he worked, his thoughts kept drifting to Naira. He had never met anyone like her, so calm, so wise, so connected to nature. He wondered where she had learned so much and what her life had been like before she appeared on his land. She had mentioned tracking a Mustang, but he felt there was more to her story. Around mid-morning, Ethan heard soft footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw Naira walking toward him with her usual quiet confidence. She carried a small leather pouch and a bundle of herbs tied with a thin string. Though the sun was bright, she didn't seem bothered by the heat. "You came early?" Ethan said with a small smile. "You needed help," she replied gently, "and the land has more to show." She walked toward the pit, studied the water level, and nodded approvingly. "It is rising, slowly, but it will grow. Underground springs often begin shyly." Ethan laughed softly. "Shy water. I like that." Naira smiled, a rare but warm expression. Then she knelt beside the pit and tested the soil around it. "We need to widen this area," she explained. "If we make a small basin, the water will gather more easily." So they started working together. Ethan dug with the shovel while Naira used her hands to shape the edges neatly. She worked carefully, as if she didn't want to disturb the land too much. Her movements were graceful, almost like she was following a rhythm only she could hear. They worked for hours, stopping only to drink water and rest under the shade of the cottonwood tree. During one break, Ethan asked, "How did you learn all of this? About the land, the soil, the signs?" Naira looked thoughtful for a moment. "My people taught me," she said softly. "We believe the land is alive. It has memory, it has feeling, and it speaks through small signs. If you learn how to listen, it will guide you." Ethan admired the respect in her voice. "I wish I knew half of what you know," he said honestly. "You can learn," she replied, her tone encouraging. "Anyone can learn if they take time to watch and understand." When they returned to the digging, the sun had climbed high, turning the sky a bright white blue. Sweat rolled down Ethan's face and arms, and dirt clung to his clothes. Despite the hard work, he felt lighter inside than he had in months. By early afternoon, the basin around the spring had grown wider and deeper. The amount of water now collecting there was enough to fill several buckets. Ethan filled 2 and carried them carefully back to the cattle. The animals drank deeply, lifting their heads with renewed energy. When Ethan returned, he found Naira kneeling beside the water, sprinkling a few crushed herbs into it. The scent rose gently into the air. "What is that for?" Ethan asked. "It keeps insects away and helps keep the water fresh," she explained. "A small gift from nature." Ethan watched her with quiet respect. She was young, but her knowledge could put many older ranchers to shame. She wasn't just skilled, she was connected to the earth in a way he had never seen. After they finished shaping the basin, Naira stood and brushed the dust from her hands. "Your ranch will live now," she said softly. "But we should look for more." Ethan nodded eagerly. "I'll follow wherever you lead." They spent the rest of the day walking across different parts of the ranch. Naira paused often, studying the ground, touching plants, watching how the wind moved the dry brush. Ethan followed beside her, learning as she explained things he had never noticed before. "See this plant?" she said at one point, pointing to a small cluster of green leaves. "Its roots search for moisture. If you find where it grows thickest, you can trace the path of underground water." Another time she stopped and looked at a cracked patch of ground. "The earth broke this way because it dried too quickly. That means it was wet not long ago. The spring might have flowed here in past seasons." Ethan listened carefully, absorbing every word. He felt like a student learning from a patient teacher. He realized how much of the land's story he had been ignoring simply because he never knew where to look. By late afternoon, Naira found another promising spot near a narrow dip between 2 hills. She pressed her fingers into the soil and nodded. "This place remembers water, too. It might be deep, but it is there." Ethan didn't hesitate. He began digging immediately. The work was difficult, but he pushed through it. Naira guided him with small instructions, telling him when the soil changed or when he was heading in the right direction. As the sun lowered, they reached a depth where the earth felt slightly cooler. Though they didn't find a full spring that day, they uncovered a moist layer that proved the presence of water far beneath. It was enough to give Ethan another plan for the coming days. They walked back to the ranch together, the sky painted with colors of pink, gold, and soft purple. Ethan carried his shovel over his shoulder, tired but deeply satisfied. Naira walked beside him silently, her steps as light as ever. When they reached the porch, Ethan turned to her with heartfelt gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You've given me hope. More than hope. You've given me a future." Naira looked at him with calm kindness. You do not owe me anything. Helping others is part of who I am. But you've done so much, Ethan insisted gently. You didn't have to. I did, she replied softly. The land led me here, and sometimes we meet people we are meant to help. Those words stayed with him long after she walked away. That night, Ethan sat on his porch again, watching the stars appear one by one. The ranch was quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. In the distance, he could hear the soft rustle of grass, the gentle breath of the cattle, and the faint trickle of water from the new spring. For the first time in months, the ranch felt alive again. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and let gratitude fill him. He knew the drought remained, but he also knew he wasn't fighting it alone anymore. Naira had brought knowledge, hope, and a quiet strength that reminded him the land still held secrets and gifts. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he felt certain of one thing. His life had begun to change the day that quiet Apache girl stepped onto his land, and something deep inside told him this was only the beginning of a bond that would shape both their lives in ways neither of them could yet understand. Ethan woke up the next morning with a peaceful feeling he had almost forgotten. The sun was just beginning to rise, spreading soft colors across the sky. He stepped outside, breathing in the fresh morning air, and headed straight toward the new spring. The water had risen a little more overnight, forming a small but steady pool. It gave him strength just to look at it. He filled a small bucket and carried it to the cattle. They gathered around him, their movements a little livelier than before. Seeing them regain energy made him feel proud. It was a small victory, but a powerful one. Ethan looked across the land and felt hopeful, knowing Naira might return today. Even though she had helped so much already, she had said there was still more the land could offer, and he trusted her completely now. Around mid-morning, he saw her approaching from the hills. She had the same calm walk, the same gentle but confident expression. Ethan waved, and she returned the greeting with a slight nod. "You've been busy," she said, noticing the fresh water, the cleaner trough, the healthier cattle. "It feels good to work when there's hope," Ethan replied. Naira walked beside him as he showed her how the water level had grown. She inspected the basin carefully, dipping her fingers in and examining the soil around it. "It is becoming stronger," she said. "This spring will serve your land well." Ethan felt grateful beyond words. "I wouldn't have found it without you." She glanced up at him, her expression calm but warm. "The land wanted you to find it. I only showed you the signs." After checking the spring, Naira suggested they explore another part of the ranch. Ethan agreed quickly. He enjoyed learning from her, and he wanted to make sure the ranch had every chance of surviving the drought. They walked toward the eastern side, where the ground sloped gently and the wind moved in a different direction. Naira walked slowly, paying attention to every small detail: the movement of dry grass, the color of the soil, the shape of the ground. She knelt several times, touching plants or pressing her hand into the earth. Ethan watched her with admiration. She seemed to blend with the land as if she belonged to it in a way no one else did. After a while, she pointed to a line of stones that formed a natural curve. "This place has a memory too," she said softly. "Long ago, water flowed through here." Ethan knelt beside her, trying to understand. "How can you tell?" She lifted one of the stones and showed him the smooth underside. "Water shapes everything it touches. Even stones remember." He nodded slowly, amazed at how much she could read from such small signs. It made him realize how much of the land he had overlooked all his life. Naira stood and walked a little further. "There may not be water close to the surface here," she explained, "but you can use this area to guide rain when it comes." "Rain feels like a faraway dream," Ethan said quietly. "It will come," she replied with certainty, "and when it does, This land should be ready. Together they worked to clear a narrow path where water could flow naturally once rain returned. They moved stones aside, shaped the soil into a gentle channel, and created small spaces where water could gather instead of running off. It wasn't a quick job, but they worked steadily, talking in between their tasks. Ethan learned more about her as they worked. Naira told him she had no permanent home. She traveled often, following the patterns of nature and helping people along the way when she felt guided to. She spoke of her elders who had taught her to respect the land and understand its signs. Ethan listened with deep interest. He had lived his whole life in one place, but she had seen so much more. Her life sounded peaceful, meaningful, and full of purpose. He admired that. At one point he asked, "Doesn't it get lonely traveling so much?" Naira paused, looking toward the distant hills. "Sometimes," she said softly. "But the land is a friend, and the wind carries stories. And sometimes I meet people I am meant to help. That makes the journey worth it." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest at her words, though he didn't fully understand why. He looked at the gentle slope they were shaping and felt grateful she had chosen to help him. As noon arrived, they rested under the shade of a small tree. Ethan offered her water, and she accepted with a quiet thank you. The breeze carried the scent of dust and dry grass, but there was something peaceful about the moment. After a few minutes of rest, Naira spoke again. "There is still one more place we should check." They walked toward the northern edge of the ranch, where the land rose slightly and gave a view of the surrounding hills. This part of the ranch was quiet, almost untouched. The wind moved softly here, and the ground held a different energy. Naira stopped near a cluster of rocks and knelt down. She touched the soil, lifted a handful, and let it slip through her fingers. Then she pressed her ear against the ground. Ethan watched silently. He had learned that when she listened to the earth, something important always followed. After a moment, she stood up and said, "This place is resting." Ethan tilted his head. "Resting?" "Yes," she said with a small smile. "Sometimes the land becomes tired, just like people. It holds its strength deep inside, waiting for the right time. If you leave this area undisturbed, it will recover faster when the rains return." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. He never imagined the land could have moods or needs like a living being, but Naira made it sound so natural. They stayed there for a while as she explained how different parts of the ranch carried different memories. Some areas were strong, some needed healing, and some were ready to offer support. Ethan listened carefully, feeling like he was finally learning the language of the land. As the afternoon sun lowered, painting the sky with warm colors, they walked back toward the ranch house. Ethan carried the tools, and Naira walked beside him, quiet but peaceful. "You have done a lot today," she said. "Your ranch can breathe again." "You've changed everything," Ethan said gently. "I don't know how to repay you." She shook her head. "You do not have to repay me." "But I want to," Ethan insisted, feeling the sincerity in his heart. "You saved my ranch, maybe even my future." Naira paused, looking at him with calm eyes. "The land brought me here. I only followed." Still, Ethan felt he owed her something deeper than words. He didn't say anything more, but the promise settled quietly inside him. When they reached the porch, Naira said she would return the next day to help him check the new areas they had shaped. Ethan's heart felt lighter knowing she would come back. As she walked away toward the hills, the last rays of sunlight touched her figure, making her look like part of the land itself, graceful, calm, and full of quiet strength. Ethan stood on the porch long after she disappeared from sight. He looked over his ranch, the cattle resting, the new spring shimmering, the wind carrying a soft whisper across the fields. He felt something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace mixed with admiration, a sense of connection, and a quiet hope that he didn't fully understand yet. He knew one thing for certain. Naira had given him more than water, more than knowledge. She had given him a new way to see the world. And he had a feeling the next day would bring even more changes. Changes he could feel in the air, in the ground, and in the steady beat of his own heart. When morning light gently touched the land, Ethan stepped out of his small wooden house and looked across the ranch with a calm breath. For the first time in many months, the world around him felt peaceful. The danger that had been following him for days was finally gone. The greedy men who tried to take the spring had been driven away after Ethan reported them to the town officers. The community, who had known Ethan for years, stood by him. They confirmed that the spring was on his land, and that he had every right to protect it. With so many honest voices supporting him, the troublemakers had no choice but to leave. They disappeared from the valley, and no one saw them again. Ethan felt relief, but he also felt something deeper, gratitude, the kind that filled his chest like warm sunlight. None of the victories, none of the survival, would have been possible without Naira. Her wisdom, courage, calmness, and loyalty had held everything together. He walked toward the spring Naira helped him find. The morning air was cool, and a thin mist hovered over the fresh water. It sparkled under the rising sun, pure and steady, as if it were the heartbeat of the ranch itself. Seeing the water flow peacefully made Ethan's heart soften. This spring was not just a water source. It was hope, life, and a new beginning. As he stood there, he heard quiet footsteps behind him. When he turned, Naira was already there. She walked with the same gentle confidence she always carried, her steps light like she belonged to every part of the land. She wore a small leather pouch tied at her waist, and her long dark hair moved with the breeze. Her eyes held calm strength, the kind that made you believe everything would be all right. "You came early," Ethan said with a small smile. "I wanted to see if the spring still runs clean," Naira replied softly. They both stood beside the water, watching it ripple. For a long moment, they did not speak. There was no need. The silence between them was warm, filled with quiet understanding. Finally, Ethan turned toward her. He felt words rising inside him, words he had been wanting to say but didn't know how to express until now. "Naira," he said gently, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my ranch. You saved everything I have. You stood with me when those men tried to cause trouble. You protected the spring. You gave your time, your strength, your knowledge. I owe you more than I can ever pay." Naira looked at him with calm eyes. "You do not owe me anything." But Ethan shook his head. "No, I do. I owe you more than gold." His voice was sincere. He wasn't trying to impress her. He spoke from his heart, from a place of deep appreciation. Everything she had done had changed his future. Naira listened quietly. She lowered her gaze for a moment, then looked up again. "My people believe that when someone is in need and you can help them, you help. Not for reward, not for something in return. You help because it is right." "I understand," Ethan said softly. "But still, I want to do something. Something that shows how much your help means to me." She smiled a gentle smile. "Your words are enough." But Ethan didn't feel that way. He had seen how Naira's tribe lived. He had heard stories of the challenges they faced, dry land, limited resources, and the difficulties that came when other groups did not treat them fairly. He wanted to do something meaningful. "Your tribe should share the spring," he said suddenly, speaking from a place of instinct. "This water, it should be for you and your people too. I want to share it." Naira seemed surprised. She blinked slowly, her expression softening in an unexpected way. "You would do that?" she asked quietly. "I would," Ethan answered without hesitation. "You helped me survive. Now I want your people to survive too. The spring is on my land, yes, but water is life, and life should be shared. For the first time, Naira looked truly touched. A softness entered her eyes that Ethan had never seen before. She stepped closer to the spring and touched the water with her fingertips, letting it flow gently across her hand. "My people will be grateful," she murmured. "This land has been hard on us too. A clean water source will help the children, the elders, everyone." Ethan nodded. "Then it's settled. We'll figure out a way to make it work. I'll speak to the town. You speak to your tribe. We'll make an agreement together." Naira smiled again, this time with warmth that reached her eyes. "You have a good heart, Ethan." He felt a quiet pride inside him, but also a calm peacefulness. Something about her approval meant more than he expected. They walked along the edge of the ranch, watching the sunlight grow stronger over the grass. The land looked alive now, greener than it had been in months. Birds were returning, singing gently from the nearby trees. The cattle grazed peacefully, no longer weak from drought. The whole ranch felt reborn. Naira walked beside him, her steps steady and silent. Even in calm moments, she carried the quiet strength of someone who understood the world more deeply than most people did. Ethan admired that. He admired her courage, her intelligence, her ability to stay calm even in the hardest times. As they reached the far fence line, he said, "You know, before all this happened, I was close to giving up." "You did not give up," she reminded him. "You kept fighting." "I tried," Ethan said, "but I was tired. Everything felt hopeless. I didn't see a way out." "Sometimes," Naira said gently, "hope comes from someone else, and then we carry it ourselves." Her words stayed with him. They felt true, kind, wise. They kept walking until they reached a small hill at the edge of the ranch. From there, they could see the entire stretch of land, the fences, the cattle, the growing grass, the shining spring. The view was beautiful, calm, filled with the quiet promise of a better tomorrow. Ethan looked at Naira and said softly, "You've become a part of this place, a part of my story, a part of everything that will come next." Naira looked at the land, then at him. "And you have shown me kindness," she said. "Kindness that will not be forgotten." The wind moved gently across the hilltop, brushing their hair and clothes. The sun was higher now, warming the earth. The moment felt peaceful, like the world around them had finally found balance. After a long silence, Naira turned to him. "I will come back often," she said, "to check on the spring and to help in any way." "I'd like that," Ethan replied softly. "You're always welcome here." Together they started walking down the hill side by side. Their footsteps matched naturally, as if the land itself had brought them into harmony. They did not need to speak. Their silence was full, warm, and meaningful. At the bottom of the hill, Ethan paused. Naira paused beside him. They looked across the ranch, his home, her discovery, their shared victory. The story of how they met, how they fought, how they saved the land, would stay with both of them forever. It was a story built not on riches, but on courage, trust, and the belief that people from different worlds could come together and make something lasting. As the sun shone brighter and the day opened in front of them, Ethan whispered once more, almost to himself, "You saved my ranch. Now I owe you more than gold." Naira heard him. She didn't say anything this time. She simply smiled, a small, peaceful smile, and kept walking beside him. And together they stepped into a new beginning,